This week's parasha, Ekev, includes one of the most famous exhortatory passages in the Torah. And I didn't read it this year because I read it last year. I mean, that's not an excuse not to read it again, but I wanted to read that passage that focuses on the land of Israel. But of course, I evaded speaking about Israel. So let me quote the passage, which will be very familiar to all of you, from Deuteronomy chapter 10. Ve'ata Yisrael, ma Adonai Elohecha sho'el me'imach, ki im liyirat Adonai Elohecha, lalechet bechol derachav u'liahava oto, ve'la'avod et Adonai Elohecha, bechol levavecha u'vechol nafshecha. And now, O Israel, what does the Eternal One, your God, demand of you? Only this: to revere the Eternal One, your God, to walk only in divine paths, to love and serve the Eternal One, your God, with all your heart and soul, keeping the Eternal One's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you today for your good. Abarbanel, the 15th century Portuguese commentator on the Torah, offers this comment to the little phrase in the Hebrew, ki im, which is translated as only this. This is the only thing that you need to do in order to do what God demands of you. He says this: when Moses begins his answer to the question, and now, O Israel, what does the Eternal One, your God, demand of you, by saying only this, he would seem to be minimizing the demand. Yet the things he demands are overwhelmingly great. Indeed, the rhetoric of the Torah makes it sound easy to heed God's demand. Reverence, walking in God's paths, love, keeping God's commandments and laws. Yet what do they all mean? And how do you compel a person to revere or even love God and walk in his paths? And which commandments and laws are we expected to keep? Is it enough to pray, to observe Shabbat, festivals, other observances in the spirit of our liberal Judaism? Is it enough to affirm our identity within a social or cultural context, to fight against anti-Semitism and identify ourselves as Jewish because we are born into Jewish families or choose to be part of a Jewish community? What is striking about this response to the question is not the abstract principles that demand love, reverence, and obedience, but something else. Our faith, says Moses, is based on something urgent, practical, active. We are not called to contemplation, but to be like this God of Deuteronomy, who, quoting from a little bit later in the same passage, shows no favor and takes no bribe, but upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and befriends the stranger, providing them with food and clothing. So you too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. 26 times in Deuteronomy alone, the stranger, the ger, is mentioned, frequently alongside the fatherless and the widow. It is those without protection, without family, without food security, people who have fled their homes, who are bereaved. These are the people, says the Torah, towards whom our obligations never rest. When you drill down to the principles that Judaism teaches us, you find this single urgent message: seek out the needy, the poor, the vulnerable in your society, and take care of them. Give them what you can and do what you can for them. Nothing else matters. It's because of these verses and others like them in the Torah that I do not recognize myself in Liz Truss's description of the Jewish values, which she equated with her party's values and British values too. I do not see the whole of the Jewish community in this country as self-starters or setting up their own businesses. And what did she mean when she referred to the importance of family and always taking steps to protect the family unit in relation to the Jewish community, as though family values belong exclusively to us, the Jewish people, but not to any other people or religion? Do other faiths and other people of no faith not cherish the importance of family? And what kind of family is she referring to? The nuclear family? Father, mother, 1.7 children? What about blended families? What about same-sex families? What about couples who choose not to have children or can't have children? What about the stranger, the fatherless, the widow of the Torah? What about the homeless or those estranged from family, people who are completely on their own? What about Shoah survivors or people who find family among friends or community? How many of us know of individuals who barely have any family left? A cousin, perhaps, a nephew or niece, or no one? Furthermore, and I'm sorry that I'm repurposing my words from Shalom LJS yesterday, my thought from the week yesterday, but it seemed an important point to make. The unsubstantiated claim that Liz Truss made that there is creeping anti-Semitism and wokeism in the civil service requires evidence. I suspect that many civil servants, Jewish or otherwise, found Truss's remarks offensive, displaying ignorance about the embrace of diversity and diversity training that exists within the civil service. I don't want to make my own generalizations, but my limited experience of people in the civil service is the very opposite: a desire to learn, to embrace diversity, to experience different cultures and religions. In my thought for the week yesterday, I asked the question, what did Liz Truss mean by that curious term, wokeism, which she used in the same sentence as creeping anti-Semitism? My limited research took me to the origins of the word in African American vernacular English, meaning to be alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. But it came to mean, in general usage, to be well informed or aware, especially in a political or cultural sense. Today it encompasses sexism and other issues to do with identity politics and social justice. Terms like woke or wokeism, the latter a noun constructed from the past tense of the verb, now carry a pejorative meaning, eclipsing a progressive and sincere awareness of what is required for the well-being of our society. Being woke once meant that you were well-informed, conscious of the deep inequalities in our society, of discrimination and other social justice issues. Instead, today it is used disparagingly and has become a trigger for political polarization and score-pointing. I'm not sure how appropriate it is for me, from the pulpit, to comment on the leadership contest that is taking place in this way, while those woke issues in the original sense of the term that require our attention urgently are abandoned. If only our leadership would awaken themselves to the critical state of children in poverty and the families who are already struggling to put food on the table and are frightened of worse to come, or to the catastrophic climate emergency which you referred to earlier, Alistair. If only they would take time to study the words that are written in our Torah portion this week. Cut away, therefore, the thickening about your hearts. It says, circumcise your hearts, are the words that's used in the passage, and stiffen your necks no more. For the Eternal One, your God, is God supreme, who shows no favor and takes no bribe, but upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and befriends the stranger, providing food and clothing. You too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. This is no double-edged sword of wokeism in its pejorative sense, but an urgent awakening call to social justice that should unite everyone, political parties, religions, races, and nations. This is what our Jewish values demand of us more urgently than ever. Perhaps it is time for our putative leadership in this country at least to listen out for the voice of the people and for a return to the vision of a society that above all protects its most vulnerable.